Hello, I am back today with another video, and today we are talking about another movie, a political movie, which I think is perhaps the best movie of the 21st century so far. I know that's saying a lot, and I know I said that about the previous movie too, but it's very underrated, and most people won't agree with me when I say it's the best movie. Which is why I felt this video had to be made. So the movie is Vice. Uh, Directed by who was it directed by? Actually, let me look it up. But it's about Dick Cheney. Vice, 2018, directed by Adam McKay. And so it is about basically Dick Cheney and his kind of rise to power. Dick Cheney, if you don't know, was the vice president under George W. Bush, and is a very kind of unpopular figure in most circles today because he was a very kind of neocon figure, which meant that he advocated like the Iraq War and things like that. And so in many circles, he is considered a war criminal, a crook, just a bad guy in general, both on the left and right these days, right? Because even kind of the Trumpian right does not really like the neocon, right? Um, yes. So why do I say that it is one of the best movies? So, by the way, this is not an endorsement or criticism either way of Dick Cheney. Um, I, I'm purely talking about just the movie itself and how I think the kind of the filmmaking was done. I think Vice is the best movie of the 21st century precisely because of just the sheer filmmaking quality and the storytelling kind of like zeal of it. Um, every character in Vice is extremely clear. Yes, it caricatured, but extremely clear, and they have a very clear want. And the filmmaking is kind of done very crisply, in a way that I think really captured kind of the spirit of the moment. So, just as a quick summary, film starts with 9/11. As one would imagine, one would imagine for a movie, mostly about the Bush era. It starts with 9/11. And obviously, Dick Cheney was a kind of very involved figure in that era, and he was a very critical figure in kind of steering the response to 9/11, right? So how should America, after having been attacked, respond to 9/11? Um, and so it kind of goes over his kind of tumultuous kind of his early years to his later kind of more kind of his rise to power, and then eventually his uh, kind of retirement and like how he's kind of remembered. And he recently passed away a few years ago, which was after the movie was released, but it's nevertheless a very kind of important moment. Um, cool. So the movie starts with his childhood. So he goes to Yale, but then he struggles to adjust, and he eventually drops out. And at one point, he's just kind of a loser, right? So he is newly married, or he has a girlfriend at the time, but he gets a job working on like on a telephone line, something like that. But he gets in trouble a lot. He doesn't really have his life together, and overall, he's just a not very great figure at this point. And so he's a kind of college dropout. He is working a dead end job and things like that. Um, and so his girlfriend kind of basically tells him to get his shit together, and he does. So he enters the he enters the U.S. Congress as I believe an intern at first, where he meets Donald Rumsfeld. Right. So Donald Rumsfeld is played by Steve Carell, who you might know from The Office, and Donald Rumsfeld is kind of the Washington D.C. darling. He went to Princeton. He was the captain of the Princeton wrestling team. He was an ace fighter jet pilot in the Navy or the Air Force, either one. And now he is in politics, and so he's a kind of a very stereotypical kind of hotshot, like rising star in DC. So Rumsfeld kind of takes takes Dick Cheney under his wing, and he kind of becomes his protege. Um, yeah, he becomes his protege, and he kind of learns kind of like the ins and outs of Washington and the kind of the harsh truths of like how the world actually works. So, for example, there's a scene where Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State at the time, and Nixon are discussing bombing Cambodia very openly in the White House, and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld are kind of outside the office, and Rumsfeld basically explains, okay, this is the amount of power that's available in this office, in this building, the White House. And that just in Nixon and Kissinger having a conversation, they are able to decide whether millions of people live or die. And so, as soon as the conversation is over, bombs are dropped over Cambodia, and a major extension of the Vietnam War kind of takes place. And so that's kind of like the overall vibe of this movie. It deals very heavily with themes of power and just kind of ambition in general. Um, yeah, and so eventually, right? It takes some. The movie takes you through kind of the Nixon years, the Ford years, the Nixon years, the Ford years, and then eventually to Carter, and then to Reagan, and so forth. And so kind of, and so Dick Cheney kind of rises very quickly, and he makes a man of himself. But but he also runs into heart problems and kind of health problems in general, and so he has a very kind of hard time. Uh, I'd say, uh, the it's a very hard time kind of adjusting to the reality of like what being a kind of a mainline person in politics is, especially since he has two young daughters, and so he basically retires after a while. But then, after a few years in retirement, George W. Bush comes to ask him to be his running mate. So, by the way, earlier, George H. W. Bush, the father, Bush 41, he is he comes to Dick Cheney to he comes to Cheney and is kind of a good kind of family friend. But now George W. Bush has come to Cheney to ask for his to ask to be his running mate, and Dick Cheney at this point obviously says yes. Um, Very reluctantly at first, but then he eventually kind of realizes, oh, since Bush is a very kind of open figure, he can kind of manipulate him to let the vice presidency kind of take on a new importance in a way that it didn't have before. So that's really cool. So anyway, it takes you through kind of Dick Cheney's vice presidency, um, and yeah, there's not a lot to say about this because most of this is just in the historical record. But his main kind of contribution is the orchestrating of the Iraq War, the insertion of kind of like oil corporate influence into politics in general, right? Because he used to be the CEO of Halliburton, which is an oil conglomerate, and just a lot of uh, kind of general corruption and neocon kind of idealistic pandering, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, so that's honestly most of the movie. But again, just by saying the content of the movie does not really do the movie justice, right? The movie is not really about the content. As really as weird as weird as that is to say, the real strength of the movie is just like the degree to which it kind of shows the kind of the raw kind of power politics of Washington. The raw power politics of Washington. The like the kind of the very selfish and yet kind of very masterful maneuvering of like various political figures to their own selfish ends, and just a lot of things like that kind of happen under the hood. And so I think if you're interested in politics or just like how the real world actually works, or like stuff like that, I think this is a very good movie. It's a very good movie, and I would be um, very surprised if anybody agrees that this is like the greatest movie for the 21st century. But just purely in terms of filmmaking quality, not even in terms of like plot or like storytelling or screenwriting or things like that, but just purely in terms of like the crispness of the filmmaking. I highly recommend Vice by Adam McKay. Also starring Christian Bale. I forgot to mention that because I thought it was obvious from the posters, but yes, starring Christian Bale and Steve Carell, they make a really good duo, and Christian Bale, as usual, gives it his 120%. I've never seen a performance where Christian Bale is not the hardest working person on the entire cast, and this is no exception. Christian Bale gained a bunch of weight to be Dick Cheney, um, and and so it's an almost flawless kind of transformation, and I'm extremely surprised that they got Christian Bale to even do this because you can't really tell that it's Christian Bale. And so if you can't really tell that it's Christian Bale, then what's the point of getting Christian Bale to play this character? You know what I mean? But anyway, nevertheless, I'll see you guys later. See ya.